Okay, and at the end of the speech, you get one of the most beautiful things that Shakespeare ever wrote. It's just a lovely kind of moment. Um, he says, he lists off all of these things. Why is he listing off all of these powers that he has? He's kind of talking to himself because he's by himself now. So he draws a magic circle on the ground, and he tells all of these little creatures, that he's been controlling. He says, you guys aren't that powerful on your own, but I've been able to I've been able to use you to do all this crazy wizard shit, like cause eclipses and earthquakes and control the winds and throw lightning bolts and bring the dead people back to life. I don't know if they mean zombies or what, but he can do some shit. Um, so he sort of lists. He thanks all the creatures for helping him accomplish all of this because it's really a lot, they're doing a lot of the work, just like Ariel does a lot of the work for Prospero in this play. Um, so he thanks them all. He says I'd like to thank you and you and you and you and you for helping me do this and this and this and this and this. So it's like two lists. Um, and then at the end of the speech, he says something really surprising. It's a very, very surprising moment, and it starts here when he says, um, I use my art, my magic to do these things. I remember Shakespeare's art is writing plays. He says, but this rough magic I here abjure, meaning he gives it up. And when I have required some heavenly music, which even now I do, to work mine end upon their senses that this airy charm is for, I'll break my staff and bury it certain fathoms in the earth, and deeper than did ever plummet sound, I'll drown my book. It's kind of an incredible moment in Shakespeare. Prospero lists off all the creatures that helped him do all these things. He lists off all the creatures that helped him, and he lists off all the amazing things he's able to do with their magical help. And then he says, I'm giving it up. He's retiring, which is really interesting because Shakespeare, pretty much right after he wrote this play, retired. He stopped making plays. So it's a metaphor. Prospero gives up his powers. He says thank you to all of the creatures that helped him make this play. He says thank you to all the magical creatures that helped him with his magic, and then he says I'm giving up magic now, and I'm going to break my staff, and I'm going to throw my book in the ocean. And I think that's like his magic book. That's his wizard book that has all his spells in it. He's just going to destroy it all as he's retiring and he doesn't want it anymore. He's essentially quitting magic. I mentioned earlier in the play about how this was like kind of an addiction for him. He got so addicted to magic that he was supposed to be, a governor in Italy, and he got so addicted to the magic that his brother, he just spent all day in a library, and his brother took over and tried to have him killed. Um, and then he did it again. He got addicted to he was putting on a show for Ferdinand and Miranda and completely forgot Caliban was trying to kill him. And he's really mad at himself for forgetting again. Um, he got, so he forgot again. And this time, at the end of the play, because at the end of this play, he's going to go back to Italy and be a governor again. And he says, you know what, this magic, I'm giving it up. He says thank you to all the little creatures that helped him kind of accomplish all of these amazing things. And then he says, I'm done. I'm giving this up. I'm gonna break my magic staff. It's like the moment at the end of Harry Potter where they break the Elder Wand. He says, my magic staff, I'm gonna break, and my magic wizard book with all my spells, I'm gonna throw it in the ocean and let it sink. He's giving it up, and you might think about Shakespeare here, retiring. It's a metaphor. Because Prospero saying thank you to all the spirits that help him do his magic is Shakespeare, who is saying thank you to all the actors who helped him do his plays. Again, what's the word Prospero uses for magic? Art. What's the word Shakespeare would use for his plays? Their art. So just like Prospero says goodbye to all the spirits, Shakespeare says goodbye to all the actors. And Prospero lists off all the cool things the spirits helped him do. But it's like Shakespeare's listing off all the cool plays he got to do. And he says, thank you. And then he retires. He says, I'm not doing this anymore. And he breaks his staff, and he drowns his book. It's a little bit like Shakespeare breaking his pen and throwing his books away. He doesn't need them anymore because he's not going to do this for a living anymore. Because for too long, Prospero kind of forgot about the real world in all those books. And you wonder if Shakespeare forgot about the real world when he was living in plays so much. And he just got tired and he kind of retires. Um, So it's a kind of giant metaphor, and I really like it for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons why it's super important is I always tell my students over and over and over again, even though they refuse to do it, I tell my students over and over and over again, um, you gotta talk about the author and the audience. Well, here is the author. Prospero's speech about these creatures is really Shakespeare's speech about his actors. And Prospero's magic, all the powers that he lists off, is a metaphor for Shakespeare, talking about all the plays and all the things that he's done. And we've been tracing this for a long time. And this is really Prospero sort of saying goodbye to everybody. So it's a kind of lovely little thing. And it's neat to think about. It's really important because it's a metaphor, which I think is really worth looking at. But also, it's about author and audience. That it's essentially a play about making plays. My students just they love to just talk about, like I think my students want to have a conversation about like Prospero like he's a real person, but he's not a real person. He's a character in a play, and I think it's really valuable to remember that somebody wrote this play, Shakespeare, and to think about Shakespeare's perspective. And by looking at Prospero's perspective, and by thinking about these things, you really get a sense of kind of Shakespeare is in there somewhere. I don't know how much, because we don't know that much about Shakespeare's life. We know very little. But one of the things we do know is he wrote this. This was one of his very last plays, and it's really interesting that one of Shakespeare's very last plays involves a wizard whose powers are described multiple times as art, who makes illusions, just like Shakespeare makes, who thanks all of his actors, who thanks all the people that helped him do all of this magic, just like Shakespeare might thank all of his actors who helped him put all these plays. One of Prospero's magic things is bringing back the dead, and Shakespeare wrote a lot of plays where he had dead historical figures, and he brought them back to life in the form of a play, and he had an actor play someone who had died in history. So it's interesting to kind of think about Shakespeare doing this stuff. And that kind of ends that section of The Tempest. So all we have left for this semester is to look at the other thing in The Tempest that I'm interested in, and then we should talk a little bit about your research papers, and how to do research for your final paper. But pretty soon I'm going to put I'll probably put it up tomorrow or today, the assignment for The Tempest, so that you can write paper 3. I will put that up today. So all that really remains in the semester is I want to talk a little bit more about The Tempest, a totally different and unrelated thing. And then I'll talk a little bit about how to do research, but you don't have to wait for me to talk about how to do research to get started on paper 4. Paper 4 is the paper that has a little bit of research in it, but you don't need me to talk about research. You can just start it, and then you can listen to me talk about research later, which I will do, and then we can kind of wrap this semester up. So we're just about done here, only a couple weeks left. So, okay, looking good. Okay. Shakespeare's complicated. Shakespeare's characters are complicated. It's one of the things Shakespeare does best. So just as a little to kind of say where we're going next, the next thing I want to do is I want to look at Prospero all over again from the beginning. Now, I spent this entire video series so far on The Tempest talking about what a sweet, nice old man Prospero is, and how he's just like Shakespeare, and he's this kind person who forgives his enemies, and who retires from magic, and he stops his addiction to magic, his addiction to sort of illusions, and joins the real world, and it's a really sweet, nice story. But one of my favorite things about Shakespeare is how complicated his characters are. And so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about Prospero, and what a horrible, sneaky old man he is. He's so sneaky that I think he fools everybody into thinking he's so nice. Now, it doesn't mean that he's not nice. I just want you to see that what Shakespeare does with Prospero is he makes a character who's extremely complicated. On the one hand, he seems like a very sweet, nice, kind old man who's a metaphor for Shakespeare. On the other hand, he seems like a horrible, horrible person. And at the end of the play, I actually don't know what I think of Prospero. Iago? I know what I think about Iago. Iago's the worst person who's ever lived. But Prospero is complicated, so that I don't know how to judge him. So far, I've only said good things about Prospero. And it's so sweet that he forgives his enemies, and he retires from magic, and he learns a lesson, and he seems great. But I would like to talk about Prospero. It's possible that Prospero is a really sneaky person. And he's so sneaky that he makes everybody around him think that he's nice. Miranda seems to like him. When the king meets him, he likes him. But it's possible that he's actually a massive sneak. So I'll talk about that in the next video.